Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and today it's one of my many individual album reviews that I've been planning for a while, but considering how anticipated this review probably is by my standards, which are very low, I literally have I think 14 subscribers as of the time I'm recording this, yeah, I wanted to get this one out sooner rather than later, and even then this review is later than I planned on it being. But look, it took priority over all the other projects that I'm working on for this YouTube channel, some of which I still hope to publish, and some of which I might have to cancel just because we're getting closer and closer to year-end list season, and I really don't want to have to cancel any of those. But just to clarify, I want to make it clear that I do appreciate everyone who's watched my channel, and I don't want to take that for granted. But let's be serious here, calling one of my reviews highly anticipated feels really weird and isn't actually honest. Except for maybe my review of any new Taylor Swift album, in this case her 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl. Now look, there is context for this, and I have to take into account that there's a good chance some friends and family members of mine are watching this video, and I need to be honest while also being as respectful as I can. You see, I have quite a few close family members who are fans of Taylor Swift, and her music has been a big point of discussion within my family for years now, and I love joining the conversation. It's something that a lot of us relate to, being a part of her fandom, and that's something that I shamelessly will admit about myself, despite how uncool it may be in certain social circles. I've heard a lot of people complain about Taylor Swift music, a lot of people who I respect a lot, and yeah, I've been a Taylor Swift fan for a while, at least a few years at this point, and it feels like each time I revisit all her albums, that's just cemented in me even more. As was the case in the past few weeks, or I guess at this point, maybe the past month or so by the time this video is published, when I re-listened to all 11 studio albums prior to this one. And yeah, I could spend this introduction to my review of the album going over my thoughts on each and every Taylor Swift album, but I also think that's exactly what someone might expect who completely misses the point of my reviews, or at the very least the point of my Taylor Swift reviews. Alright, look, I don't talk much about my YouTube channel in real life. Yeah, I may occasionally mention it here and there if it feels really relevant to the conversation, but even then, I almost never give details on what it is. I mean, yeah, if people are really curious, I'll let them know. It's not like some big secret that no one can know about, but there also is a very big part of me that kind of wants to limit my channel's exposure to people I know personally as much as I can. Now, to anyone I do know personally who may be watching this, if you are watching, look, please don't feel like you need to stop watching or like I'm trying to ban you from my channel. You can watch as many of my videos as you want. It's my choice what content I want to release publicly on the internet, and you have every right to watch my videos. I have no problem with it. But all of this to say that my intent with this YouTube channel was never to appeal to an audience full of my close friends and family, rather whoever else randomly stumbles upon it. In large part because when discussing certain music, I do sometimes end up sharing more about my personal life than a music critic like me is probably expected to. And a lot of that is things that I feel a little bit weird about people I know watching, especially if it's people I don't know all that well. Because look, even though I always talk about not wanting to get too personal in my reviews, which is still something I try not to do, it's kind of hard not to when discussing certain music, because without at least some small hints into my own personal tea, it might not really get across to the viewer what I'm really trying to say about said song or album that I'm talking about. And that brings me to my next point, which is that the one thing nobody seems to understand about my videos, no matter how much I explain it to people, is that my YouTube channel is more about me than the music that I'm discussing. And yeah, part of that is the fact that I'm a big music fan and I have my own taste in music. But it also can get a lot deeper than that, sometimes in ways I feel uncomfortable admitting, especially knowing that there may be people I know watching these videos. You'd be surprised how easy it can be for people to piece things together. And it's honestly part of the reason I'm not too disappointed I had to cancel my top 50 songs of 2024. Don't get me wrong, time and not wanting to put in all the effort were the real reasons I canceled that video. I wasn't lying, and yeah, I was disappointed I had to do that. But I also do realize that if I'd gone ahead with that and discussed the specific songs from the Tortured Poets department that were going to be on that list, yeah, I'm not sure I was ready for that. And I still feel like maybe I'm not, which is why I'm not name dropping those songs here. There's 30 plus songs on that album. You can take your guess as to which ones if you want. It's up to you. But here's the thing. I feel like Taylor Swift's music is in a lot of ways about feeling misunderstood. Yeah, she's got a huge variety of lyrical themes throughout her 2-decade discography, but that feeling that nobody really gets her shining through in the writing is one of the main reasons why her music has appealed to me. So it is fitting that this video is the one in which I'm talking about feeling misunderstood as a YouTuber. But alright, this new album was apparently supposed to be a collection of pop bangers, as it sees Taylor reuniting with Max Martin and Shellback, both of whom worked with her in the 2010s on 1989 and Reputation, both albums which I realized recently are better than I remembered them being, even though I'm not totally sure either lands among my favorites in her discography. And I'll admit, I had a weird sinking feeling that this new album was going to be underwhelming. Yeah, I was excited about it, but I also wanted to temper my expectations, because even if fun, upbeat pop music worked for Taylor a decade ago, it was going to be really difficult to predict how well she'd do with that sound in terms of quality a decade plus after 1989. And unfortunately, I was leaning a little bit toward expecting this to disappoint. Just because I've heard Taylor Swift albums that have had a good idea or concept or just overall vibe that just haven't fully coalesced into a compelling project, or at least not compelling for all the right reasons. And there's also the question of, how the hell do you follow up the Tortured Poets department when that album felt like the culmination of everything we've seen and heard from Taylor Swift since her rise to stardom, and also considering just how much was packed into that insanely long double album? Well, it almost doesn't feel right that we're getting a new Taylor Swift album this soon. It feels like it should be almost hard to listen to a new fun pop album by Taylor Swift in 2025 and just act like this isn't the same artist who gave us such deeply confessional poetry that pretty much transcends basic art in both Midnights and the Tortured Poets department, and maybe even going back to albums like Folklore and Evermore, which were 5 years ago. But alright, I guess I'm gonna attempt to review this album. But beyond the genre and the style and the assumption that this would be more upbeat and happy, I actually had no idea what I was getting into. And alright, so my original idea with this album was that I was going to complete my entire review before looking at the ratings and what all the critics think. I knew I'd hear some opinions here and there. I even asked a few friends and family members for their opinions. But I didn't really want to try and find the general consensus from online critics or the larger fan base as a whole. But I accidentally stumbled upon more of the ratings than I intended, and at that point I just went, fuck it, whatever, I may as well see what everyone thinks. And it turns out most people seem to think this is Taylor Swift's worst album to date, even those who couldn't stand the Tortured Poets department. It seems like even a lot of the hardcore Swifties who defended albums like Reputation and Midnights don't even like this album. Now, for me as a critic, I do think this is an easier album to review than some Taylor Swift albums are, in large part because it doesn't have the same emotional resonance for me as Taylor Swift's music can have in her catalog's most crushing, devastating moments, or at least the moments that really cut deep for me. And in some ways, this album was what I was expecting. It's more upbeat, not nearly as sad or emotionally complex, at least not in the ways she's usually known for, and the production is definitely flashier in ways that I was expecting. But I also thought this would be an album full of bangers, or at least attempts at bangers, like 1989 and maybe even parts of Reputation sonically, albeit with different subject matters. And none of this is me saying that I expected this to be great, or even particularly good, to be honest. I hate saying that just as much as you hate hearing me say it, trust me. But I was genuinely surprised by how weirdly mellow this album is. There were more slow ballads than I expected, and I'm not really sure there's more than a couple full-on pop bangers, if any. And keep in mind, when I say bangers, I'm talking about sound and style, not quality. Now remember what I said earlier, how the hell was Taylor Swift supposed to follow up the Tortured Poets department? Because, look, regardless of whether or not you like that album, there just didn't seem to be an obvious way to follow that up. And yet, she proved me wrong, because she answered that question with this album. The more I think about it, the more I think this makes perfect sense as the follow-up album to Tortured Poets, with most of the album celebrating her relationship with Travis Kelce and finally feeling happy and finding the right person for her. And on a bit of a side note, I really wish Taylor and Travis all the best in their relationship and upcoming marriage. I don't usually discuss artists' personal lives in a lot of depth, and I try to stay out of discussing their relationships in my reviews, but I am really happy for them both, and I wish them all the best. And circling back to the album, I think it makes perfect sense for Taylor to write such a happy album now that she's found the love of her life, and the lack of sad songs in this record was probably a great choice. And if this is really the most authentic thing she could make, I'm happy for her. But I also think musically this feels like the perfect follow-up, especially for this new era of happiness and joy, where Taylor is just gonna do whatever the fuck she wants in this album, not even try to get critical acclaim. At least that's the way I see it. She's smart enough to know that an album like this is not the way to go to win over the critics. And honestly, I don't think she really cares that much. I mean, yeah, she's made it no secret that she cares what people think, But no matter what she does, there's always going to be a large portion of people who aren't happy with it. She just has to try and train herself to not give too much of a fuck. Shake It Off, arguably her biggest hit, was never about her not caring what people think, rather not letting her ego and fear of being disliked stop her from being her most authentic self. And now to finally talk about my personal feelings on this album, I actually think it mostly works for what it's trying to be. That's not to say that I don't have any issues with it personally. There are definitely some moments that left me scratching my head wondering what the hell Taylor, Max Martin, and Shellback were thinking. But not only does this make perfect sense as a follow-up to the Tortured Poets department, but it also succeeds at being that, and I think it ended up being a pretty good album. I should clarify, I don't think it's better than Tortured Poets, at least by my standard, whatever the fuck that means, as one of a small percentage of people who resonated with that album more than I'd like to admit, and I think I got that album as much as any random non-famous individual like me could possibly get it. But this is nowhere near as bad as most people are making it out to be, and I want to at least try to somewhat explain why I believe that to be the case. Although I'm actually not going to have that much to say about it, this album really left me with a lot less to say than I thought it would. It doesn't have the same level of depth and just real lyrical gut punches that the Tortured Poets department did. But look, all that being said, I do understand why some people are cringing at this album, and a weird comparison that comes to mind for me is 21 Pilots' Scaled and Icy from 2021. By the way, in my next mini review video, I will discuss the new 21 Pilots album, and I'll briefly mention Scaled and Icy as well. But the thing with that album and The Life of a Showgirl, they're both the sort of album where it might take a few listens to warm up to, and there are some weird moments that just straight up don't work. But as an overall album, it makes sense because you eventually realize what it's trying to do, and you can't help but respect it for being so unique and feeling so authentic. And when I say you, I'm mostly just talking about myself, because the majority of you, the viewers, probably don't like either album and think I'm just talking a whole bunch of nonsense. But as someone who likes Scaled and Icy, I personally couldn't escape that parallel between these albums. And look, I was gonna try and do the same thing that I did on my blog with the Tortured Poets department, but again, I just think this album's a lot less to take in than that album was, not only because it's way shorter, but also because, well, this is pop music as art. Unlike her last few albums, which were art that happened to be pop music. And the first thing that's easy to notice about this album is that the production is actually really good. I wasn't sure what to expect with Max Martin and Shellback working on this album, especially because the production on 1989 did have its shaky moments, but I actually think the sound quality and the instrumental timbres is actually really strong on this album, even on some of the mellower tracks like Eldest Daughter, where the mood of the song is really captured with such great sound quality. And I really like the percussion's power on Elizabeth Taylor and the guitar of Opalite, which blends pretty much perfectly. And Ruin the Friendship might be one of the best produced songs on the album, with that excellent bass line which the drums play off super well, and when paired with some very pleasant vocal melodies, and again, the sound quality of this song is fantastic, we get a song that should be great, but unfortunately the lyrics have some problems, which I'll get to discussing later. But considering the showgirl aesthetic of this album, I understand this production style, and I don't think it makes sense to complain about it being too polished or anything like that. The showgirl this whole time has been Taylor trying to prove something to her audience and show off, and for an album that represents that side of her, I don't think it could have sounded any different. And honestly, the only song where I don't like the production is the title track, which closes the album, where the percussion has some weird out-of-place reverb, Taylor's vocals totally overpower the mix, and there's something weird about the vocal production on Sabrina Carpenter's voice, which I really can't describe, but I don't like how it sounds. Now, honestly, I don't think the album sequencing really matters all that much. To be clear, I'm not talking about albums in general. There are a lot of records where the sequencing matters a lot to me, rather specifically The Life of a Showgirl, because I see this more as a collection of songs rather than a storied narrative. That's not to say the album doesn't work better as a whole. I think the larger concept is one of the biggest reasons why I'm defending this album, that being because the execution is actually pretty good, I should mention that. But I don't think the specific order of the tracklist is a huge deal. Yeah, Eldest Daughter makes sense as track 5 considering the Taylor lore, but honestly I've never really cared that much about the whole track 5 thing, even though track 5 often ends up being among my favorite songs on Taylor's albums, albeit less than I remember once I actually remind myself of some of the more disappointing track 5s in her discography. But keep The Fate of Ophelia where it is, or put it at the end, move Actually Romantic to the second or third spot, open the album with Ruin the Friendship, but the title track is the opener, it really doesn't matter or make much of a difference to me. I do think the album is mostly backloaded, but I don't really see that as a positive or a negative in this case. Although there is an asterisk to that because I think the worst song here is the closing track, partially because of the production, but also because of how bad a ripoff it sounds of Cool by the Jonas Brothers, which is a terrible song in its own right. Yeah, this is better than that song, but not by as much as it should be. Now, I would say forget about that song at the end, but I do actually think it kind of fits considering the theme of the album. I mean, it makes sense, it is the title track, but while I think the themes are fitting, it doesn't need to be the closing track. It also doesn't hurt that it's the closing track either. My point being, it does make sense to have a song about Taylor's rise to fame and the change in perspective from then until now. I just wish the song was better. But on the topic of the lyrics, well, I will admit there are some kind of weird moments that I don't think really work. Most notably, what the fuck was the point of Ruin the Friendship? Yeah, I know, the song is almost definitely about a friend of Taylor's who passed away, and I could try to be more sensitive, but two big problems. First of all, the main story of the song is that this guy had a girlfriend who was away at the time, and she thinks she should have kissed him and let him cheat on his girlfriend. I don't need to say any more. Secondly, if the song is supposed to be a tribute to this person who died, why is the whole thing about Taylor and her problematic desires? You did the right thing. Stop bitching and complaining and questioning yourself. This doesn't even make any sense to regret. And while there aren't very many notably bad moments aside from that, there are some moments that I don't think are nearly as clever or as interesting as she seems to think they are. Like Elizabeth Taylor, which doesn't really say much of anything despite all the lyrical descriptions, and it just comes across as kinda corny to me. I mean, yeah, there's a point to it, but it just feels like something we've already heard a million times from Taylor Swift already. And personally, I find a song like Clara Bow to be way more lyrically interesting if you want a song like this comparing her to another celebrity. Or there's also the opener, The Fate of Ophelia, which I also don't think is as interesting as she seems to think it is. And I find the idea of being saved from the fate of Ophelia a little weird in this song, especially considering how she mentions being happy with just herself before this relationship. But I also think there are some moments that work mostly well. Yeah, I get that Eldest daughter is kind of cliche at points, and rhyming bad bitch with savage is kinda corny. She's definitely not the first person to do that. But honestly, I think it kind of fits for almost a sort of midlife crisis song, albeit with some sense of stability which shines through all the gloom, that likely being her relationship with Travis. And honestly, Wishlist is kind of similar and reminds me of some of the more fun, upbeat moments on Lover, and Honey is another one of those moments. And Cancelled is one of the sharper moments on this album lyrically. Yeah, I get how off-putting it might be at first, but there's enough self-awareness to realize that she has been the target of a lot of criticism from the public, some of which is deserved and some of which isn't, and yet the feeling of relatability to others in similar situations is often the starting point for meaningful connections. And while we're at it, I should probably discuss Actually Romantic. Now, while I don't really agree with the theories that Taylor Swift completely misunderstood Sympathy as a Knife, if this was supposed to be anywhere near the same level of that song, then it's just completely embarrassing. Sympathy as a Knife is the best song on Brat. I didn't even fully get into that album nearly as much as everyone else did, but even I'll admit that song goes way harder than probably anything on this album. And all that being said, look, I kinda get where Taylor's coming from. Or maybe I shouldn't say that, because there's probably way more going on between Taylor and Charlie XCX than what we all see on the surface, and you, the viewer, likely knows more than I do. I don't really follow celebrity drama that closely. But if we're looking at it as a song battle, Charlie wins easily. But while Charlie did express feeling envious of Taylor and all her success in her song, I also see how weird it might feel for Taylor to hear a song like that about her on one of the most critically acclaimed albums of the past few years, which was also a huge moment culturally and arguably the fan favorite on that album too, especially considering how panned the Tortured Poets Department was by the critics. And while I don't think Actually Romantic is a very good song, it is kind of a clever idea, and it becomes weirdly easy to forget that she's almost definitely talking about Charlie in this song. I don't really like the song, but I at least get it. And look, the song that seems to be getting the most eye rolls is Wood. And for what reason other than the shock of Taylor Swift making a sex song? It was bound to happen eventually, and she's mentioned sex in her songs before, it shouldn't be a surprise. And you know what? This proves she can actually make a good, silly sex song. No, the song is not particularly sexy, but it's also not supposed to be. It's got some clever lines and double entendres, and I really like the groovy instrumentation, and it's also a very well-produced song. Again, it's fun. And even aside from that, I mean, I like the optimism amplified by the fun catchiness of Opalite. I already mentioned the great bass line on Ruin the Friendship, even though I think that song is pretty much ruined by the lyrics. Honey and Wishlist are both really cute songs with great melodies. And I don't care what anyone else says, Eldest Daughter is a great song. Not only for the lyrics, which I talked about earlier, but it's one of the best moments on the album vocally. And the pianos and guitar really stood out to me too. I guess if you care about the lore, this makes perfect sense as track 5. And either way, if it were on a different album, it would probably get way more credit for being a really damn good, in my opinion, great ballad, which I think is a lot better than even a lot of fan favorites in Taylor's discography. Probably not one of her best ever songs, but still a really strong moment on this album, which I don't think is getting the credit it deserves. And honestly, I can say the same thing about the rest of the album. It makes sense for Taylor Swift to make this album at this point in her life and career. And again, when the production is really good and the songwriting is quite good in a lot of moments, again, there are some weird moments that I don't think quite work. But honestly, for me, I'm going to give this at least a light 7 out of 10. No, I'm probably not going to be going back to this a whole lot. The best songs are nowhere near Taylor Swift's best. But I don't know. I don't fully understand the hate. Yeah, I know I didn't have as much to say about this album as I was hoping to. This review is kind of rushed, I'll admit. I actually have to head out the door pretty soon as I'm filming this. And I maybe just kind of skipped over some things I could have said. But again, I've realized more and more, my reviews are not going to cover everything on an album. I'm not going to explain everything in depth about why I like a song, why I don't like a song. I try to explain somewhat, but, you know, listening to the songs, listening to the albums for yourself, I mean, yeah, if you really want to try and figure it out, you can go ahead and do that. And other than that, you know, if my reviews are not complete, I'm okay with that. But all of this brings me to the next thing I want to talk about briefly. Yeah, so year-end list season is coming up, and I definitely want to publish all my year-end lists. I don't think I'm going to do a worst albums of the year. I think I'm just going to do worst hit songs, best albums, best songs. It'll just be a little bit less effort that I need to put in, especially listening to bad albums, so it's worth skipping over the worst albums list. I'll admit I don't know if I'm going to be able to find 50 great albums to fill out the top 50. I'm really going to try, which is why for the next couple of weeks or months, I might not upload as many reviews. I do have another mini review video that I'm working on, probably somewhere from 7 to 10 albums in that one. But for the next little bit, I might not be posting as many reviews. I'll still be trying to listen to a lot of music, but just for time reasons to try and find enough albums to fill out my top 50, I might need to listen to a bit more music than I was planning on, which means there'll be less time for actually making reviews. But I guess we'll see what happens. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of this album and or what you thought of my review. Is there anything you think I can do to improve my reviews? I'm happy to listen if you have any feedback. And yeah, I don't know why this album's getting as much hate as it is. I mean, I get it. I kind of get it to some extent, but I'm just surprised there's not as many people defending it as I would have expected. But anyway, thank you for watching. I'll be back, hopefully with more mini reviews soon. Also planning to do a couple more individual album reviews. I want to review that Deftones album that came out a couple months ago, but I still want to listen to their other albums first to prepare myself for that. Anyway, all this being said, thank you so much for watching. I will hopefully be back soon.